Well, it's been a while since Riot tried to do something new with League's lore. But they've done it. To be fair, Riot kinda pulled off the impossible because with the new seasonal system, League's lore actually feels alive again. And so for the most part, the story is now being told through cinematics and comics and minigames and champion bios. With the really cool addition being the new short story for LeBlanc, which single-handedly turned LeBlanc into one of the coolest champions. But even with all of these lore updates, the system of how the champion bios worked was the same for a very long time. Every time a champion would come out, they would get their bio, which is like a summary of their story. Think of it like a Wikipedia page on the champion. But after that, we used to get short stories, which would tell stories from the perspective of the champions. These were usually focused on telling us what the champion is currently doing in the world. And well, with the new seasonal system, because the stories are being spread across so many different medias, it seems Riot doesn't have enough of a time frame to pull off both a bio and a short story for a champion and make the entire story make sense. Which is why, for the last couple of champions, we only got the bios. And I have to say, it's working out okay, despite the lore nerds being sad that we don't have short stories anymore. But that all changes today, because after many years, Riot changed how they handle bios. And they are turning them into the best of both worlds. And it is all based on how League's lore used to work. Going back, although League's world has always been massive and therefore scary to get into, it was designed in such a way so that no matter where you started reading, every story of every champion was written in such a way so that the beginning would give you all the context you would need for your current read. This meant that even if you went to your favorite champion, you skipped the bio and you started reading the short story first, which again is the story where the champion is somewhere out there in the world doing stuff. Well, at the beginning of the short story, it would still give you all the context so that you would know the backstory of the character. In a way, this was part of the brilliance of League's lore. You would be able to pick it up from literally anywhere. But obviously, this also meant that the entire system could be simplified. And in fact, that is exactly what Riot did with Yunara. As Yunara hit the live servers, even though we already got quite a bit of her story through the comic with Xinjiao, it is only now that we got her bio. And to my surprise, when I opened it up, I was met with not a traditional bio. Instead, it seems like the base of Yunara's story is written like a short story. It has the dynamics of the storytelling with the first-person action you would normally get, but it also heavily utilizes the story setup for context which short stories used to have. And so now, the new bio Yunara got is a great short story that also gives you all the context you might need, meaning it also functions like a traditional bio. And the result is quite amazing. And so now, to show you how awesome Yunara's story is, let's go through it. Yunara's story begins with a letter that was found in the ruins of Old Goshen. And we quickly learn that it was written by Yunara herself, which means it was later during Yunara's life. During the time the spirits of Ionia were restless as the land was being invaded by the Darkin. If you are asking why was she here in a so far unnamed temple, well, you'll see later. In the letter she wrote, she mistook Azakana on her roof for rain, but she quickly left her quarters to dispatch all 13 of them. Of course, if you too need more context, Azakana is just an Ionian word for demons. She then described how 2 of these demons were more powerful. One had a grotesque maw that shattered against the Ion Urna, which are the floating beads that Yunara is using for her weapon. The other demon rose from the water like a shadow, with eyes piercing the gloom. As it attacked, darkness swallowed the entire temple. But as Yunara attacked, her weapon illuminated the darkness and cast the demon away. Here, the letter teases that Yunara hasn't left the temple for a while. Instead, she spent her time meditating here. She also hinted that it could be his power that attracts the demons, which could be hinting at the patron, a fellow hidden Darkin who was also present at the temple, whom we've learned about from Yunara's comic. But after that, the story cuts and jumps into an entirely different part. Here we read about Yunara meditating as her mind reaches the spirit realm. There, she tended to think about the dead, including Master Lao. Of course, from our previous delves into the story of the new ARAM, we know that Master Lao is the new shopkeeper. From his voice lines, we know that he used to be the previous Fist of Shadow, which is essentially a unique battle title for a ninja of the Kinku. And of course, from all the reveals we know that Yunara became the Fist of Shadow after him. Which again makes sense why Yunara would consider him her master. But of course, because Yunara is thinking of him, that means that Master Lao was already dead. Yunara thought of his teachings. He taught her sparingly, but the meaning was always deep. And it took her a long time to fully understand it all. But then Yunara also mentions another member of the Kinku. She mentions the Grand Master Bainan. Now, I did my research and I really tried, but I couldn't find this character anywhere, meaning that Yunara likely introduced a new character. It should be someone who is fairly high in the Kinku order because, as we learn here, Bainan turned them all into proper acolytes. Now, putting on my theory hat, I would not be surprised if this meant that Grandmaster Bainan is actually the Mask Keeper whom we know from Legends of Runeterra. That is someone who is seemingly turning the Kinku into acolytes. But that is also someone who appears on the new ARAM. And so all the connections seem pretty solid there, but it's still not directly confirmed. Anyway, at the same time, Master Lao already started preparing them for a war too. He warned them that fighting the Fallen Ones was futile. And even fighting their mortal followers was not to be taken lightly. Of course, given the context, he is talking about the Darkin who invaded Ionia, as well as all of their worshippers. But sadly, all Lao did was spark a feeling of challenge instead of a warning. And so many had died seeking victory. Yunara even added that she wished he would have followed his own advice, teasing that Lao himself had fallen against the Darkin. As to how that happened, well, it's possible that is being teased in the next part. Here we were in the middle of the night with Yunara and Lao outside. They were taking down worshippers of the Darkin, with Yunara taking one down in Lao's blind spot. She slipped between the shadows and struck him down. As Lao turned, his face held a proud smile, which quickly turned to horror when he spotted the symbol on the dead man's tunic. All he could say was, "The blood. She will come for us." Trying to clean up Yunara's tracks, he tore off her gloves and he wiped them on his own clothes. This was Yunara's only chance to run, and so she did. But she witnessed Master Lao standing against one of their immortal enemies, the Darkin. The story mentioned that Lao was bound instantly, and what the Darkin did to people was something Yunara wished she had never witnessed. Now, when it comes to the Darkin binding creatures through blood, of course it would heavily hint that the one Master Lao faced was Zolani, the Darkin who first mastered blood magic and who also spread it across all the other Darkin. But we do know that some other Darkin were also able to do pretty bad things with the blood magic, so actually, you'll see at the end there is the possibility that Lao also faced another Darkin that we know. But first, in the next part, Yunara reflects on her vows as the Fist of Shadow. In the context of the story so far, it all makes sense, because since Master Lao just died, Yunara would become the next Fist of Shadow. And so the vows read, "I follow the eye's guidance and turn to the heart of wisdom. I will vanquish all who disrupt balance. I will prune the tree of weakness and blight. I will serve no false gods, nor kanmei. I will not allow my feelings to prevent what must be done." All of these lines are a bunch of lore references all over the place. Her following the eye's guidance means the Eye of Twilight. Her turning to the heart of wisdom means the Heart of the Tempest. Her not following false gods or kanmei is talking about the War of the False Kanmei, where the Darkin pretended that there were gods to gain mortal followers. and she will not follow her feelings is something that has been part of the Kinku from the very beginning. Yunara knew these words very well because, as the story revealed, she was put into the Kinku as a child by her parents. She followed these words without question her entire life. But then it mentions that she was asked to relinquish her title to another one, because Grandmaster Bainan asked her to leave the Fist of Shadow behind and go on an important task. She would guard the Temple of Twilight. A task which was given to her with the words, "You go now into a place where few can follow. From here it is you who must determine what is to be pruned. Deliver your judgments as if they were my own." Yunara knew that her and Bainan would not speak again. And while we lack further context, it is safe to assume that this Temple of Twilight is the same unnamed temple from the very beginning of this story. The one where she's been meditating and the one that's been attacked by the Azakana. Because it is also extremely likely that is the place where the Kinku held the patron, who was secretly also a Darkin the entire time. And so in the next part, we learn more about what Yunara was doing in the temple. With all the endless time, she was experimenting with the Ion Urna. Trying to turn it into an extension of herself, she started dancing with it, of course. And she also started using it as a stepping stone as she was walking around the temple. With all of her meditations and taking baths in the spirit waters, she could feel herself becoming more powerful. Though she notes that she is missing the hot springs of Koshin. Which, of course, is a reference to something else that is currently happening in League of Legends. Which takes us to the last part, where we might find a familiar face. Here, while Yunara was meditating, she got a flashback. It was a vision of her memory. One where her and her patron were chasing the fan. Now, in the comic, we could see a Darkin in the background who was holding a fan, but they were never directly called that until now. The reason why this is interesting is because this is very likely the confirmation that this fan is the Ionian Darkin fan called Pra, the Breachwalker. And if this is a flashback of the Darkin that Yunara and Lao had quite a bit of history with, then it is possible that it wasn't Zolani, but it was Pra who took down Master Lao. Though remember that Zolani also eventually ended up in Ionia, and so with all the bloodbending abilities, it is still more likely that Lao faced the true horror. Anyway, in the middle of this flashback, Yunara was remembering fighting Pra's followers. She turned around and expected to see her own people, but instead the environment changed. She was no longer in the mountains chasing Pra. She was back in her temple. And instead of her people, she saw a stranger clothed in foreign robes. She couldn't tell if this was a prophecy or a wayward nightmare. But it didn't matter. She would not lose her faith. There was still more to be done. Now, this ending is very likely teasing that she saw Xin Zhao, a stranger in foreign robes. Though it would be funny if she also saw LeBlanc, who would also obviously have foreign robes and who is also still involved in all of this story. But that is where Yunara's bio ends. And I'll be honest, there is a good chance this might not be my only video on Yunara, because as you can see, the bio is still not your traditional summary. So once the season is over, we'll probably do a complete story for her with the minigames and the comics and the cinematics and this story. But so far, I have to say, her story is pretty good. Look, over the years I learned that League's lore audience likes the stories for two things: Fiddlesticks and the Darkin. And right now, it seems like whatever the Darkin finale with LeBlanc is gonna be, it's gonna be a banger. But now, I'm gonna do the unthinkable and I'm gonna do what all YouTubers do. I'm gonna ask you to comment below. Because I'm genuinely curious to see if people like this new format of bio short stories. For me, it totally works as long as the story keeps flowing. But looking into the future, if someone goes back and they want to learn about the story that happened, it might be difficult to pick up in the middle of all the things. They might miss out on important context from the minigames and stuff like that. Though thankfully there is one more place that is actually keeping all the stories intact. And that is League's client. Yeah, don't forget that the champions have their story summarized there too. But don't take it too seriously. Somehow Yunara's story there is as long as Shaco's.